My name is Keisha Lee, and I'm your host for Take It All.
You do, and where in Africa people can find you.
Okay, so I am a lecturer in the Department of Private Law at the University of the Western Cape. So you can find me here in South Africa. I specialize in reproductive law, although that is not the area in which I teach, coincidentally. So reproductive law has been a passion of mine for the last almost decade, if I'm honest. I remember my first experience going to watch them wash sperm at Tygerberg Hospital, and I have been enthralled ever since.
That's so cool. Washing.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that. That is so cool, actually. So
there was more involved. It was frozen as well, so it wasn't just washed.
Okay, the specimen was frozen first. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So before we start all the really serious questions, I want to ask you, what is your favorite dessert?
Oh, that one's easy. Panna cotta. Blueberry panna cotta.
Oh, okay, I won't judge you for that. So I'm going to ask you, would you rather never eat panna cotta like ever in your life, or would you rather eat a whole serving of panna cotta 3 times a day for the rest of your life?
No, I actually would give up the panna cotta. It's not something I would do every day. I couldn't possibly. It's a treat, a rarity. I won't enjoy it if it's on the menu every day.
That's very true. Okay, so you are basically an expert in reproductive law, and the first question is, in the context of the law, what would you say is bodily autonomy?
Okay, so bodily autonomy is basically the right to make decisions regarding your body. Now, we have a perception that only relates to your physical body. But the reality is that your body also includes your brain and your emotions and those aspects of you. So if you are prevented from making a decision that impacts on your emotions and impacts on you mentally, then that has implications for your bodily autonomy. So it's basically the right to choose for yourself what it is that you want for yourself.
Okay, awesome. Could you, since you're the only law person I've had on here, well, for now, the first person, could you quickly do a hierarchy of the laws in our country so people can understand what is the highest law and why it's the highest law, and then what comes after that?
Okay, so the Constitution is the supreme law of the country, so that is right on the top tier. And after that, you get national legislation, then you get secondary law, white paper law, etc., regulations, that kind of thing. So what we are most impacted by is the Constitution and national legislation, so acts of Parliament.
Awesome. So could you inform us of the relationship between bodily autonomy, the law, and the ability to reproduce?
Okay, so the Constitution, being the supreme law of the country, provides in section 12(2)(a) that we have the right to bodily autonomy, and we specifically have the right to make decisions regarding reproduction. So that is the first link, okay? But the ability to reproduce is not just the ability to decide not to have a child. For example, you want to terminate your pregnancy, you want to be sterilized, etc., or you want to use contraceptives. It also includes the right to decide to, in fact, have a child. Now, traditionally, reproduction was sexual in nature. That was the only way people reproduced. You engaged in sexual reproduction, and if you were lucky, a baby resulted. However, there are so many people that suffer from infertility and are unable to fall pregnant naturally. So as a result, developments in medical science started treating or targeting infertility. And as a result of that, assisted reproductive technologies emerged, which make it possible for people to reproduce not only sexually, but what we call non-coital reproduction or reproduction with assistance.
And I know written on ARTs. You have an article about ARTs. Could you just explain what ARTs are, please?
Okay, so ARTs are, it's the abbreviation for assisted reproductive technologies. So it's a range of technologies that have been developed that assist people in order to reproduce with assistance. So you would automatically think that it includes artificial insemination, but surprisingly not. AI is not regarded as part of ART because it's too low grade. All you need is sperm ejaculation into a cup, and there you go. So it's not as higher grade as the rest of ARTs. So when you are talking about ARTs, you are talking about people donating their gametes, people donating their sperm, their eggs, their embryos even. It includes surrogacy. It includes intracytospasmic injections, which is basically if a man has really low fertility, what happens is that they take a really long needle and they find and extract that one sperm. So it's not the case of a man ejaculating, it's where they specifically go and find that one sperm, the viable one, they extract it, and then they engage in vitro fertilization so that fertility, the chances of fertility are more likely than not. Because if you're doing, normal sperm donation, etc., you're taking a chance. But with ICSI or intracytosplasmic injection, there's a higher chance because you found just that one sperm.
Wow.
There's a lot more, but I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then there's obviously cryopreservation as well, which is the storing, the freezing of gametes and embryos.
So wait, gametes are the ones that aren't inseminated?
Sperm and egg.
Oh, that's together already. What is
No, embryos are fertilized already. So the gametes would come from the individual parties, the male and the female, and then embryos is the product where those two have been merged.
Okay. Wow. I'm just realizing that while working with you, I only touched the tip of the iceberg. Hey.
You did.
That's very true. So why, if, like you said earlier on about coital reproduction, why then is the law regulating something that, why is the law regulating reproduction? Why does it find a place in reproduction?
Look, traditionally, when reproduction was only sexual in nature, people did what they wanted. There were no concerns. But because we are involving medical technologies, there's always a risk, because we don't always know how things are going to turn out. And so as a precaution, the law has gotten involved to regulate this as a way of protecting the parties. Over the past few years, it was about protecting the commissioning parents, protecting the donors, etc. But now there's a greater emphasis on protecting the rights of the potential offspring, so the child that is eventually going to emerge. Because in many cases, you're taking a chance with that child's life, and so there's a need to ask the important questions. Is making use of ART going to be in the child's best interests?
Yeah, best interest of the child, BIC, such an important principle, international law and nationally, of course.
The only problem with ART is that you're not actually dealing with a child yet. You're dealing with a potential offspring, so you're dealing with the idea of a child. But the law has identified the fact that you can't wait until there is a child who's going to potentially suffer harm. So you need to almost take preemptive measures to ensure that the child's interests are considered prior to fertilization or conception.
So I'm going to jump a question and ask, do we then have a right to have a child? Do we have this?
No.
So it's just,
we do not.
It's not we might have one, it's just no.
No. We do not have an express right to have a child. There is no provision in our constitution that you have such a right. What you do have is a right to reproductive autonomy, which also has its limitations. You have a right to reproductive health care. You have a right to privacy. So many of these rights can be interpreted in a way to assist you in having a child, but there's no express right to a child. Because if we were to recognize an express right to a child, one of the challenges that would arise is, do you then have a right to a specific child? Or do you have a right to a healthy child? And I think Pandora's box, the legislature is trying to keep Pandora's box closed as long as possible, but things are starting to creep out already.
Creeping out stuff. So just back to reproductive health rights. Could you tell us the people's, what does this particular right encompass?
So basically, the right to reproductive health care basically means having access to healthcare resources that will help you realize your desire for a child or your right to reproduce. So traditionally, what we spoke about was access to contraceptives, sterilizations. Now, those kind of things are easily available now, post-constitution, okay? Previously, it was a challenge, etc. But the right to reproduce doesn't just protect us or provide us with the right not to have children. It also provides us with the right to have children. So in the strictest meaning of the right to access reproductive health care, it means being able to get fertility treatments. It means being able to have access to resources that will enable you to have a child. The problem is that unlike with contraceptives and terminations and sterilizations, the resources for reproductive health care that will assist you in having a child are just so pricey, and the government is not able to provide for that right because it's always going to be subject to available resources. And the reality in a country such as ours is that there's always going to be more important things than someone having a baby. We don't even guarantee health care for everyone, basic health care for everyone. So reproductive health care is bottom tier, if I'm very honest. That doesn't mean that we must diminish the desire for people, but it's not a priority for government.
Yeah, I think that is evident in how the funds are allocated every year in the budget.
Exactly. And the government has a more vested interest in preventing people from having children than it does in assisting people in having children. Because by making means available for people not to have kids, it means that the government is then not adding to its existing burden of having to provide for those children if their parents are no longer able to do so. So that's why condoms and contraception and terminations are more easily available than access to means to have a child.
That's kind of true, right? Terminations. So I don't know, is positive selection, is that article out or did you ever publish it? Yes, it is.
No, I didn't. But funny enough, there was a decision recently. I'm actually looking at something on that right now. But a court recently decided that sex selection is a possibility, and it would be protected not under the right to reproductive autonomy, but under the right to privacy. Exactly, which now raises a number of issues, because why is it not forming part of the right to choose how you reproduce? Why is it suddenly a privacy issue? Because then reproduction should have been a privacy issue all along. Funny, in Europe, we don't have a right to make decisions regarding reproduction. Within the European context, for example, we have the right to family and private life. Mm-hmm. And there are conventions that recognize the right to a family. So privacy has traditionally been the means at which a number of countries have regulated reproductive decisions. But South Africa has followed the approach of Section 12.2a, but there are even limitations with that. And now all of a sudden, we're going the privacy route.
That's huge. That's such a big turnaround, hey, from reproductive.
It is.
To privacy.
It is.
Okay, so on speaking about the right to a child, back to that. So I know that you have discussed previously, well, not in this recording, but the AB case. It's a well-known case, kind of, for those who know about it, and for those who don't know about it, they'll find about it. They'll know now about the AB case. Could you tell us what the AB case is and how it has, I don't want to say changed, or what it has meant, its position now in law, and what is it doing?
Okay, the first thing I should say about AB is that it's severely criticized, and there are a lot of academics, myself included, who feels that the Constitutional Court got it wrong. But that is the leading authority at the moment, but I don't think it will remain that way. So basically what happened in AB is she was a woman of advanced age. I can't remember if she was in her late 40s or early 50s, but she had been married, and she and her husband had exhausted all their gametes, or she had used up all her eggs trying to fall pregnant, and it was unsuccessful. As a result of the strain of trying to fall pregnant, the marriage deteriorated, and eventually she felt, okay, surrogacy may be my last resort to having a child. So unfortunately, Section 294 of the Children's Act states that you can only engage in surrogacy if you are able to contribute to the genetic makeup of the child. So even if she, for example, was unable to carry the child, if she could provide an egg that would be contributing, then she would be allowed to engage in surrogacy. The problem for AB is that she was both pregnancy infertile as well as conception infertile, which means that she couldn't conceive naturally. And also she was pregnancy infertile, that she couldn't carry a child to term. So even if she had gotten an egg from somewhere else, she wouldn't have been able to sustain a pregnancy. So basically there were really limited options available for her. She then had to challenge Section 294 of the Children's Act. And one of the bases on which she did so was the right to equality, reproductive autonomy, privacy, reproductive health care, etc. So she raised a number of grounds on which she challenged the existing legislation. Interestingly enough, the High Court ruled in her favor, finding that the legislation was in contravention of her rights. However, when the matter went to the Constitutional Court for confirmation, the Constitutional Court decided else differently. So there was a majority judgment that came from the Constitutional Court, and there was a minority judgment. So the majority judgment said that her rights were not infringed because there was a legitimate purpose for the legislation, etc. Okay, so they said the reason why Section 294 exists is to ensure that a genetic link exists between the commissioning parent and the child that is later born. So the Constitutional Court fixated on this genetic link because it seems to suggest that, I'm not sure why genetics is so important for some people, because children are adopted, and where is that requirement there? To me, someone who is willing to go through all of that to have a child shows a better commitment to caring for that child than someone that goes to a bar, gets drunk, and gets pregnant accidentally. I don't mean to sound flippant, but this woman tried everything. And just because she was not able to provide a genetic link to a child, she was excluded from making use of surrogacy. So the minority judgment, however, found that a number of her rights were violated, amongst other, her right to choose. Okay? And the court even said that your right to choose doesn't just pertain to your body, it also pertains to your psyche, etc. So having a choice but not being able to carry it out, what does that mean? So regrettably, AB has now meant that this genetic link requirement will stand in the way of a number of people having a child despite their desire to do so. And unfortunately, it means that people who are both conception and pregnancy infertile will forever be left out in the cold. One thing that I found very startling about the Constitutional Court judgment is that the majority said, you know what, if you so desperately want a child, find a partner. So now you must marry someone who can give you sperm just so that you have a baby, but then you're stuck with this person that you don't even want. And my question is, what about our rights to choose our family forms? That is an aspect of privacy. Don't we get to choose? I mean, some people don't have a choice about whether or not a father's involved, and they end up with a child, that they may or may not want. But that's where they find themselves. Men can abandon their rights, etc. But there is someone who desperately wants a child, and we are denying her the right to have one.
Yeah, that's. Speaking about sperm, I want to talk about KDSA. When is a donor daddy? Your article here talk about sperm donation in South Africa. So what is, I don't know if I should ask first, what is KDSA so people know what that is?
So it's known sperm donation in South Africa. In South Africa, the position is currently that sperm donation is anonymous. And the reason why we've had this position for the longest time is to protect sperm donors, because we don't want to deter people from donating sperm, because there's a risk that someone's going to come knocking at their door 16 or 18 years later looking for a relationship. And so there was always this concern that it had to be anonymous, so there were no comebacks, basically. But as rights have evolved, a number of countries have said, but look, having this policy is not in the child's best interest, because you are impacting on their right to know their genetic origins. This right has really become very important in the past few decades. And so despite the prominence of this right elsewhere, South Africa has yet to jump on the bandwagon. There was a project by the South African Law Reform Council a few years ago. We're still waiting for progress. Nothing is happening on that score. So in the meantime, where people want to engage in known sperm donor agreements or an agreement with a known sperm donor, they basically have to create an agreement outside of what the law currently provides, if that makes sense.
So this agreement that people make, right? You said it's outside of what the law says right now. So
yes.
Do people then go about still having, like, we know there is this one case in our country where this lady went and did what she did. So how does the law regulate that now? Because someone has operated outside of the bounds of the law. What did the court say? Are we going to have these agreements? Will we see more of them in future, or what will happen?
Look, the reality is that known sperm donation takes place all the time. The problem in this particular case is that the parties had not entered into a legally binding agreement. And so she then had an interpretation that this is what it was, but he had a different understanding. Unfortunately, in this particular case, they had a previous relationship that had failed. And instead of going to a sperm bank and following the legal route, the parties decided to engage in an informal agreement which was not legalized, and therefore there was a lack of clarity. So when he then tried to assert his rights, at some point she claimed known sperm donor agreement. But the reality is that the way reproduction took place, the way in which he was involved, he went to doctor's visits, these pregnancy checks, he contributed to her laying-in expenses, the child had a relationship with him and with his mother. So it didn't resemble a sperm donor. And this is why the court said, I'm sorry, this man is a dad, he's not a sperm donor. Now, you see, this is one of the problems that often arise with these agreements is that there's an intention at the beginning, which is not legally formalized, and then people change their mind because all of a sudden they've gotten what they've wanted, and then they don't want the other stuff.
And doesn't that go with what you said earlier about this right to choose how you have your family structure, and things like that?
Yes. The problem is that if you are exercising your right to choose, you need to be clear from the get-go. And ideally, you shouldn't deviate from that. The problem is that your decision to choose will not be validated by a court if you change your mind. You can't involve a man and say, he's a known sperm donor, but then you treat him and you are benefiting financially from his contributions. And the child is spending time with him and the child knows who he is. I mean, there needs to be some sort of clarity. If he's just a sperm donor, then he should be uncle something, not daddy, if you know what I mean.
Something, that is true.
What if a man does not want to be involved in the production of a child? He needs to take the appropriate measures to ensure that does not happen. You do get cases of something that is known as sperm jacking, stealing a man's sperm. Yes. It's a term basically where you hijack a man's sperm. You hear cases of women that poke holes in condoms, or they remove the condom after sexual reproduction and they stick it in the freezer to be turkey basted later. You hear things about this, but at the end of the day, it's about consent. But the point is, consent needs to happen before the time. And if you don't know the person well enough to take the chance, I say, then don't engage in sexual reproduction with them, because the reality is, do you want to rear a child with this person for the next 18 years at least?
That's very true.
That is my stance. I always say to people, before you engage in reproduction or sex, ask, if things go south, do I want to raise a child with this person? That's because let's be honest, condoms are not 100% effective.
Yep, that's true. So, you touched on surrogacy earlier on, and the lady who tried to do surrogacy stuff, and the man in KZN who went to court who wanted to help, but again they blocked him. They're saying genetic origins are really important.
Yes.
How can we sum up the fact that the law plays such a big part in sex actually on its own, and then also in reproducing, whether it be through ARTs, because the law, obviously, I know that the positive selection that you had written, we could only go so far, and the law is lagging behind all of these ARTs, these biomedical things that are coming up. And I mean, CRISPR9, that thing. So there are all these technologies coming, but the law is like, we're trying to catch up, but also, no, wait, don't really have children because it's our responsibility if you don't look after them. So how can we sum up like that the law is and will forever play a big part in sex, in reproducing?
Well, that is the reality. Previously, the law wasn't as involved in sex as it is in reproduction now. We're not going to get away from it, but regrettably, the law needs to start making headway in this country to actually enhance people's reproductive empowerment. And this is something that I feel very strongly about. We can't forever use the excuse that medical advancements are lagging behind. I mean, that the law is lagging behind and medical advancements are traveling at such a fast space. There are countries across the world where they are setting up councils to consider these developments so that they can keep abreast with reproduction. But the sad reality in South Africa is that this is just not a priority. We have so many more pressing issues. Load shedding, lack of resources, lack of basic healthcare, issues concerning education, that unfortunately reproduction is not a priority. But the reality is that we can't remove the law from reproduction, given the way that advancements are going and the potential harm someone needs to step in and protect the parties, especially with things like CRISPR. You need to consider that there's repercussions that we won't see for decades potentially. So the law needs to somehow regulate the process. It's just regrettable that it's happening on a piecemeal basis. We are getting contradictory messages from our courts about what is permissible, what is not permissible, and the basis on which things are permissible. So that's my 2 cents. The law was never interested in sex, but it certainly is interested in reproduction.